Welcome everyone to INGS2601, Transnational Actors and Networks. This is the first video lecture for week 1, in which I will be introducing the main and the most important aspects of the unit and the unit structure. Before I do that, I want to draw your attention to the Canvas site. And here you have the most important information. Especially, I want you to have a look at the detailed outline where the explanation of all the assignments and the weekly by weekly modules is. And you have assessment guidelines. The PowerPoints are posted here, will be actually posted already. The video lectures, I will be posting this every week at the beginning of the week. So have this as your go-to page whenever you have to do anything for this unit. And then let me explain what are the main parts of the most important parts in this unit. So really the goals of the unit is, very broadly speaking, is to introduce a transnational framework. And this transnational framework is, of course, not something static that doesn't move or that doesn't have many different angles of interpretation. And because of that, I really encourage you to bring us as well as develop your own perspective, your own thinking on what a transnational framework is, beyond the materials that I'm presenting you and beyond the ideas that I bring to class. So with that said, I will have a more specific transnational perspective, a more concrete idea of transnationality that is really shaped by my own expertise, of course. And the way I look at transnationality and transnational frameworks is through the intersection of popular culture. Basically, when I think about popular culture, I'm thinking really in a theoretical level. I'm thinking about ideas about what makes a kind of like cultural common sense. What is it that we think that is natural, that is normative, and how is that reflected in different aspects of popular culture? And when I say as different aspects of popular culture, I mean anything between news to social media feeds, to popular films, to songs, to the whole array. We'll be looking at this not so much in the nitty-gritty of the different type of genres within popular culture, but from a theoretical point of view. And I will bring in some films and some documentaries, some kind of broader ideas. And you're more than welcome. In fact, I really encourage you to bring your own specific examples when it comes to these examples of transnational popular cultures. So that's one side of the question. The other side is the cultural politics of that cultural common sense. So what are the political dynamics that result from that idea that is established in our everyday lives? And within that very broad general theoretical perspective of transnationality, we will have 3 modules or 3 blocks. The first one has to do with transnational visual culture. So for instance, the kind of Hollywood mindset. What is Hollywood visualizing, and how that visualization of Hollywood makes for normative interpretations for what's normal about, for instance, revolution, about the elite, about our everyday lives. The second one has to do with the media and how the media frame all these national and transnational others. And when I say others, is other than the norm, other than what a type of transnational popular culture has framed as normative. So how does the media frame those others? And finally, we'll be looking at transnational alternatives to global capitalism. And this is because it's a new phase of my investigation of after completing a book on populism and popular culture, I'm looking at different representations of capitalism and the alternatives. And I want to really explore with you how are those alternatives presented and present themselves within the global landscape and within the global transnational landscape, and how feasible or unfeasible from a transnational point of view those alternatives are, and really dig into those ones. When basically the thinking here is, when we think about alternatives to capitalism, are these alternatives possible at a global scale and from a transnational point of view, or are they not? Or are they coming from a very specific national background that cannot be thought beyond a specific nations, even specific cities, and even a specific ideological tribes, right? So here you see the modus overview, and as you can see, these three different modules are divided in two main parts. The first one has a theoretical background, and the second one will be case studies. So we have in these case studies in the first weeks of the first module, we'll be looking at the politics of Hollywood from a transnational point of view, and we'll be looking at three different films: Children of Men, Social Network, and Parasites. And through this film, we will be thinking about ideas of, in the first case, revolutionaries, the second case, techno elites, and finally the idea of the people with the film Parasites. So in the second block, we'll be looking at media persuasion, and we'll be looking at three confrontations. When I think in terms of media these days, the first thing that comes to mind is how the media frame ideas always in terms of polarization. And in fact, within the very encoded version of what the media think the media should be, it's precisely that idea of confrontation, of polarization, the idea of giving you two versions of an event is precisely rooted in that kind of confrontational, almost unconscious way of framing events. So I will be looking at three important confrontations. Colorism. When I say colorism, I mean something very specific that we will see. So racialize others versus whiteness as a norm, and how those things can be subverted, not subverted, how it's complicated when we actually look at it from a transnational perspective. I think the example of Mexican television will be given, which is super interesting, how whiteness in Mexican television means something very different from what we think. And so then we'll be looking at migrations and different exclusion and inclusions that happens within these migration networks. And finally, we'll be looking at meritocracy and versus inequality. So how those two things are completely at odds, and they are two sides of the same coin when it comes to how the media frame it, which has to do with social mobility and the kind of tricky aspects of social mobility, how it seems something that is good that could be beneficial on the face of it, but the more we dig into, it has a dark side that is not often thought of or talked about, generally speaking, not only on the media. So finally, we get into the alternatives to global capitalism. And in here, we don't really have a theoretical background because these three case studies have their own theoretical backgrounds embedded in them. We'll be looking at Buen Vivir, the idea of good living from indigenous politics in Latin America, and how this indigenous vision of living, of good living, has spread out into other parts of the globe. Then we will be looking at the conference at the different positions between the degrowth movement and the green growth aspect of it, and how those two things are not compatible, and what it means to have a degrowth movement versus a green growth movement, which is the most transnational, normative, um, political way of thinking a solution for the global crisis, for the climate crisis. Finally, the most interesting part to me, really, of the whole course is this idea of robots and post-work, the idea that we won't be having jobs in the future, and the different type of alternatives to this post-capitalist, post-work future looks like, within the age of the robot, and with artificial intelligence in mind, and how that is necessarily a transnational dialogue, and what it means when we have that type of transnational dialogue. What are the perils, the dangers of having this idea coming through the centers of power? The idea that the robots in the end are not so scary, but they will be actually helping us creating this utopian society in which nobody has to work. Why is that problematic? And the different type of discourses and how that plays out in this transnational context, beyond the kind of centers of power where this idea of post-work is born. So